Okay, hey everybody. We are here today to talk about Aristotelian rhetoric, logos, ethos, and pathos. We've talked about this a little bit so far, so I think you have the general gist that this is sort of the central idea of a rhetoric course. This is the mainstream rhetoric approach. These are where it all started, at least in Western civilization. So, you got defining rhetoric. Rhetoric is the study of effective speech and writing. The focus of studying rhetoric is looking at analyzing how arguments are structured and also on how we can structure our own logical arguments. Now, this is something that in Western civilization dates back to ancient Greece. Aristotle didn't come up with it. Aristotle, the famous Greek philosopher, wrote a book on it called Rhetoric. But what he was doing was examining the arguments and how arguments were made around him, and then laying out rules and ascertaining rules and saying, well, these are the patterns that I see. So, you know, even though it goes back so far, or maybe because it goes back so far, rhetoric is often dismissed and criticized as being superficial, as being sophistry. And sophistry actually comes from a school of thought in Athens, Greece, actually, that would have been around when Aristotle was around. And the sophists were a school that taught you could and should be able to argue any side of any argument, and that you could win any side of any argument if you use the right techniques. And that's the idea of empty rhetoric. The sophists were kind of the early lawyers or politicians, or maybe sort of the early public relations people, or crisis management people that politicians make use of now when they get into trouble and they want to spin it so that it makes it seem less bad than it is. So, are there these empty, superficial aspects of rhetoric? Absolutely, there are. It is possible to use very clever, very carefully structured rhetoric and use it to avoid saying things. We've talked about that in relation to Orwell and politics and English language. However, what we're going to focus on is this more the idea of rhetoric as being used to, as we say with the Gilbert quote, instead of being about winning an argument, it's more about how we can progress together. So he wrote rhetoric right around 350 BC, he being Aristotle. So this is what is known as the rhetorical triangle. This is something that Aristotle came up with. And we focus on the triangle, but there's a circle around it, which is the context, or the College Board might call it the rhetorical situation. And then you have this triangle of text, author, and audience. Now, we've talked about semiotics a little bit, this idea that a text can be a physical text, it can be someone speaking, and you bring it to modern day, it can be a TikTok, it can be a Snapchat, it can be an Instagram post, it can be an Instagram story. And look at the difference between like a Snapchat you send someone and a Snap story. Those are different texts with different contexts with different audiences. An author, obviously, if you're talking rhetoric, the person who's speaking, the person who's writing, the person who's distributing the Snap, the person who's making the post. And the audience, I think sticking with the social media thing, isn't that interesting that, a lot of you talk about how the youth aren't on Facebook, but if you have a Facebook, generally your moms and your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents are on there. So the text that you as an author will create for that audience will often be very, very different than the text that you'll create for your Snap story, where your audience is primarily your peers. So the idea of this is that all of these things work in conjunction: text, author, audience, and context, that they all influence each other, and that if you change one, it may necessarily change the other. And hopefully you can get an idea of that interplay, and we're going to talk more about that as we go. So the philosophy of argumentation, the essence of argumentation, arguing can be defined as reason giving. So it's not fighting like those people up in the top right corner, but it's making claims, giving reasons. Arguing depends upon uncertainty. So, you can't argue really meaningfully over whether water is wet or the sky is blue. But you can argue over whether social media is bad for teens and whether the phones are rotting the kids' brains. And then, with that uncertainty, you have to introduce justification for your claims, evidence, logos, all the things that we're going to talk about. Arguing under this definition is unavoidable because if we are going to interact with other people, unless we only interact with people that agree with us 100% of the time, and who really has that, then you are going to be involved in arguing. You're going to be involved in being in a situation where there is uncertainty and you have to work it out with somebody else, and then you have to provide claims and justification for those claims. One of the things I mentioned before, sophistry, propaganda, manipulative persuasion, those things don't acknowledge an audience person's right to consent. Ethical argumentation acknowledges that when you're making an argument to somebody else, they have to in some way consent to listening, and they also have a right to interpret what you are saying and reflect back what you're saying and come to their own understanding of what the topic is. Within all of this, you have the idea that arguments are both explicit and implicit. If we go back to like the coronavirus and mask wearing, you have that slogan that people use during the pandemic, which is my mask protects you and your mask protects me. And, within that is an explicit argument. You can do something, I can do something, we can do something to protect each other. And there's an implicit argument, which is masks are effective. And there, you look at the audience. Now, I have to be clear, masks are effective. The science seems to have shown that. But there is an audience out there that is resistant to that. So depending upon your audience, they may or may not accept that implicit argument that goes along with the explicit argument of my mask protects you, your mask protects me. And then just this last bit is just, talking about argumentation and the idea that words are powerful and that you can look through history. You could look in Machiavelli, and he talks about how a people can be swayed by rhetoric from the right person at the right time. And, we are very, very programmed to the right argument. There's something about structuring words in just the right way, at just the right time, and just the right person that is enormously influential in our behavior. So that's the philosophy bit. So getting into the appeals, the three major appeals are logos, ethos, and pathos. These are categories that Aristotle came up with. And so logos is the appeal to reason, the appeal to logic. So his idea was when you make an argument, every argument has one of these appeals, or not one of, all of them, but they're in different amounts. And so with a logos-based argument or a logos-based appeal, this is where you're appealing to someone's logical side, to their rationality. You provide data, you provide numbers, you provide logical arguments that are based on, well, if you did this, then this would be logical to go from that. Now, Aristotle valued logos as the highest of the three. Aristotle indicated that he thought all arguments should be logos-based. But if you have ever, if you've ever watched a debate or seen a speech where somebody really just tries to hone in on numbers and data and make an argument based upon that, you realize that you lose focus. Your average audience does quite quickly, and that we as human beings, we need more than that to attract our attention. We need some kind of personal connection. We need to understand maybe why we need to trust this person. And so Aristotle had to acknowledge that there were other qualities that were necessary. The second appeal of these three qualities is ethos. And this is the appeal of one's credibility. And now this gets a little more complicated because character, reputation, credibility, those can be divided up into extrinsic and intrinsic ethos. So extrinsic ethos are things like reputation, title, credentials. If you look at that military uniform in the top right-hand corner, so there's extrinsic ethos there. We are sort of programmed to respond to uniforms. They automatically give someone more of an aura of authority. And also, in that particular uniform has a bunch of medals on it. So this person has been places and seen things and has gotten the medal that reflects that. So it shows experience. That is extrinsic. Also, titles. I was educated in such and such a college. I have such and such a honorary degree, whatever. Or if I'm maybe not an honorary degree, like I'm an English teacher, I have a master's degree in English education. Dr. Cashman has a doctorate in education. So these degrees, these things are extrinsic ethos. In advertising, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, this is the idea of celebrity endorsements of products. And you bring celebrities out and say, well, yeah, this is the product to use. Well, generally it's like, what does what does the celebrity know about toothpaste that I don't know? But it can be powerful to have that happen. It can also be misused. I have over on the right hand side an old meme. How do you do, fellow kids? And this idea of that's an older man dressed up in what he looks at as like a teen's outfit with his skateboard and trying to sort of build ethos, but it's inauthentic because obviously he's too old for all that stuff. Intrinsic ethos is a little bit more subtle. Display of reasonableness, ability, or knowledge. So it's this ability that a person has to indicate that they know what they're talking about. And so it's as I said, subtle. Sometimes you can tell maybe right off the bat. There have been studies that have done for students that with college students that they had them do, like, colleges will have them do students do reviews of professors at the end of a course. And then they ran this study where they showed college students, 5-minute clips of a professor, and then had them do a review, and they compared them to kids who had taken the whole course, and they matched up, they correlated. So they went down even showing them like a minute or 30 seconds of kids who hadn't had that professor, and then checked their reviews, and the reviews correlated very closely. And so what they drew out of that was that we have, especially students, especially if you get to college, you've been in school for so long, you develop sort of an innate ability to judge a teacher's intrinsic ethos. Um, but also, with a speaker, just the idea of, if there's something pivotal going down and the speaker is going to get up and speak to a crowd, whether that you get a sense of whether that person is focused, is diligent, is calm, is trustworthy. Now, can it be fake? Yeah, I mean, I think it can be. I think there are, actors who can act this quite well. I use the teaching example because I think it's a little more challenging, because especially as a course goes on, you kind of get a sense of whether the teacher knows what they're talking about or not, and that can have a big effect. So extrinsic, external things like uniforms, degrees. Intrinsic, a little more subtle, like when it can be tone of voice, demonstration of just like reasonableness, and just like an overall sense of whether that person knows what they are doing or talking about. So the final appeal is appeal to pathos. That's from the original Shrek. I always thought that part was hilarious when I saw that. Pathos is appeal to emotion. Aristotle liked this the least. He considered it the weakest of the three. It can depend a lot more on audience, and so if your audience is not right for the type of emotion that you're trying to use, think about stuff that we've talked about in class, the different approaches one might take in making an argument to a room of people who are strongly Republican voters versus making an argument to a room of people who are strongly Democratic voters. There might be different tacks that you take to sort of initiate that emotional connection. Um, the idea that it's unethical, pathos can be unethical if it's used to manipulate people. This is one of the things that Orwell gets into 1984. It's one of the things that he gets into with 2 Minutes Hate, and the idea of just like getting everybody so agitated and blasting them with that propaganda and yelling, and because the idea is, and what Orwell knew sort of instinctively, and the brain science has shown that in that case, when you get into that really negative space in your mind and anger takes over, the blood flow in our brains, the blood flow that goes to the frontal lobes where all the logical thinking takes place actually gets reduced, and that blood is sent to the more fight or flight primal regions of the brain. And this is what Orwell was writing about, what the party was going for, just trying to make people hate, the 2 minutes hate. Obviously, it can be used in other ways as well. I tend to think I have one of those animal shelter ads coming up in a little bit, just a print ad, and I think those are sort of over the top. I think they're too much, and it can actually have a backfiring effect. But as I said earlier, just the right amount of pathos used at the right time can have an enormous effect. In this class, I try to emphasize this idea of it being more like a spice, like something that adds a little bit of zing to your argument, but is best used sparingly. So if you go back to this rhetorical triangle, this is a different version of it, but it gets to this idea of logos, ethos, and pathos also being a part of a rhetorical triangle, and this idea that they interact with each other. And I think maybe even if I were to add something to this, I'd add a circle around it and call the circle audience. I think I've seen that. And so your audience is going to influence, which one of these things you're going to use more. And in my mind, I kind of see, depending on the audience, I kind of see like the lines shrinking and the things sort of stretching out and indicating that you're using more of one and less of the other. But the other idea is also that these things are all just like author, text, and audience, logos, ethos, and pathos are all integral, and they all influence the other. So if we were doing this in class, I would ask you these questions. So I guess I'll ask you this on Edpuzzle. So the first one, please push my car out of the ditch or my dad will kill me when he gets here. So what appeal is that person using? And number one. And number two, what appeal is this person using? If you help me move my car, I won't be blocking your path anymore. So what appeal are they going for? And number three, my father is the police chief and he'll be happy that you helped me. So what are they appealing to there? And number four, can you believe this accident? I drive race cars and I'm sure that guy was going over 100. What appeal is that person going for? So some final thoughts on ethics and argumentation. Any attempt to argue to someone else is actually an ethical question. And I don't mean it's necessarily bad, but if you're trying to persuade someone else, then you are kind of putting yourself in a situation where I'm going to try to change this person's behavior. Those are ethical concerns. There are ethical concerns involved in that. I said before, using excessive pathos would be an example of unethical persuasion. An ethical arguer respects that the audience has freedom of choice. I mentioned this earlier. So if you're arguing ethically, you go into that argument with the idea that, okay, I want this, but I'm uncertain. I'm not sure that my way is the way to go. And so I recognize that I can't make this audience do this thing. And in fact, paradoxically, if you go in with that mindset, it might almost make your argument more effective because then you build it in such a way that allows for that uncertainty. And so in the end, the end that you end up with might justify the means, but the means in that case would be um, being more open to their freedom of choice. And the idea of ethical argument also focuses on this concept of uncertainty, in the sense of that you are open to counter arguments. You are open to hearing other people's ideas, and you're open to taking that into account. And that is, a strong part of ethical argumentation, taking into account counter arguments. So the reason I have advertising here in the next couple slides, I'm going to have you look at some advertisements. Advertisements are a good place to look at using these appeals, logos, ethos, and pathos. And you see certain appeals used over and over again. And in some cases, ethics are lacking. Some cases, the appeals that are being used are pretty dark. So this first one, pretty straightforward, logos and advertising. The smart number bed, been around forever. And if you just look at this ad, they've got all of these like sort of engineering looking drawings, and 83, I think, is the smart number, and 15-year warranty, and symbols, and even the design of it from like a semiotics perspective, that bed in that picture looks very utilitarian, very engineered. They're sort of a classic use of logos in advertising. A little bit of appeal to novelty, the Sleep Number 360 smart bed. And so the smart bed. And essentially it's an adjustable bed, right? And so they sell this idea that if you buy this quite expensive bed, that they have used science to make it in such a way that you will get the ideal sleep. It's a smart bed. And, I'll be honest, I haven't researched it too terribly much, but I know they have, they have charts and graphs that I've seen in other ads, and usually it's from, the Sleep Number Institute or something like that. And so you got to ask yourself the question of how unbiased are the statistics that they are producing. If you look at ethos and advertising, these are Tag watches. They tend to be a little bit more popular in Europe, but these are expensive watches. Like I know Apple watches and whatnot are expensive, but these guys probably start at Apple Watch price $300-400 and go up. $400 is cheap for one of these watches, and they're just watches. They just tell the time. And if you look at this, ethos, you got Chris Hemsworth. This was their "Don't Crack Under Pressure" campaign. I don't quite know why he's pointing angrily at me, but there is this idea of transference in advertising. So this is what celebrity endorsement comes in. And so, if I wear that watch, then the qualities of Chris Hemsworth might transfer over to me. At least in my mind. I don't know that I would be able I would turn into him, but in my mind, and I know it's not true, but somewhere in the back of my mind, it plays on this idea. Wow, Chris Hemsworth wears it. He doesn't crack under pressure. Maybe it means that I should wear it. Then I won't crack under pressure. So this is celebrity endorsement. Pathos in advertising. Meet Otis. This is oddly, it's a dog food ad. So for pedigree dog food, but one of the things they're doing is they're saying that if you buy pedigree dog food, they'll give X amount of proceeds to animal shelters, and therefore it would save Otis. I mean, look at his face. I think there's a high probability that a certain number of you who saw when this picture came up in this video said awe in some way or another. Like, I think that probability is almost 100%. And this is intentional. So it's interesting because this isn't exactly an animal shelter ad, it's a pedigree dog food ad, but it's trying to get you to play on your emotions, and then if you buy the dog food, then you'll help Otis out. I don't know how effective that sort of two-step is, but it's an interesting application of pathos. So in some cases, you combine appeals. So this is an Eggland's Best ad. I went through some digital magazines over the weekend to find some current ads. In fact, this is so current. It says in the text, in today's uncertain times, everybody's favorite cliche right now. And I'll tell you that this is actually exploiting some thin science. There's some thin science out there that says maybe vitamin D might be a little bit protective against coronavirus. It's not at all proven. And so, but there've been some studies. Nobody knows. So this ad, is pretty recent, and today's uncertain times, and it's hinting at this, right? If you've read that, this vitamin D thing might interest you, and so it might get you to buy Eggland's best eggs. Now you got to ask yourself a question: is 6 times more vitamin D than ordinary egg? How much is that? Much vitamin D does an ordinary egg have? Is 6 times better? Is that enough, but more vitamin D to make a difference? If any makes a difference? But the question I have for you is, what appeals do you think are combined here? Maybe, maybe in your mind, maybe rank them. I'll see if I can make that work on the Ed puzzle thing. But that's my question. What appeals are combined here? And then this ad, I would argue, is another one combining appeals. I don't know if this landed heavier for me, being at my relatively advanced age relative to you. I also had a neighbor who he just got out of the hospital, so he's good, but he came very close. He had a major, major heart attack, and he was in the hospital for a while, and he was lucky to survive. And so I think when I look at this, um, I see multiple things going on in it. When I see that echocardiogram, or yeah, I think that's right, or electrocardiogram, I forget. When I see that ziggy line, I can hear the beeps, but just something makes me think flatline there. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm the only one, if it's just my aged brain getting that or not. So again, what the question is, what appeals do you think are being combined here? And then this is the last one. And I think you want to delve a little bit into your semiotics. So this is Serena Williams, and this is a Gatorade ad. And in fact, I didn't get it like right in the beginning. Like I saw the Serena Williams, I saw the best or fueled by the best. Like I got that, but then I realized there's probably something extra. There's something more, and I think it's very topical to 2020. Obviously more than 2020, but definitely this has been a topic in 2020. So, what appeals do you think are combined here? What appeals? And I'm interested. I'm interested in what you think of the background and her relation to the background. That's all I want to say there. So this is a summary of Aristotelian rhetoric: logos, ethos, and pathos. And obviously, we're going to be using these ideas quite a bit in class, but I hope this has been instructive. And when I see you next, hopefully you will have questions and ideas that you would like to discuss. Thank you.